Welcome everybody to Webinar 777, the global leader for life-changing webinars to empower dreams, transform communities, and disciple nations. The title of today's presentation is You Become What You Think About, How Your Mind Creates the World You Live in. Our special guest speaker is Vic Johnson, one of my top coaches and mentors for the past year. You are in for a real treat today. It's been called the strangest secret. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "You become what you think about all day long." In The Strangest Secret, the only personal development recording ever to receive a gold record, Earl Nightingale reveals that the secret is you become what you think about. Using that principle, you can create an entirely different world than you live in today. Your subconscious mind is responsible for just about every major thing in your life. Without the cooperation of your subconscious, the deep recesses of your inner self, change can be difficult to impossible. In today's webinar, Vic Johnson will take you step by step as he shows you how to harness and use the power of directed thought in your life. Let me introduce Vic Johnson briefly, and then we'll get started with his teaching. Evicted from his home in 1996 and his last car lost to repossession a year later, his story has become an oft-quoted source of inspiration to the more than 3,000 subscribers he now serves from nearly every country of the world. He is the author of a number of best-selling books which have been translated into several languages. Despite being totally unknown in the personal development industry when he launched his first website in 2001, Vic Johnson has gone on to become an international expert in goal setting and host of the popular TSTN show Goals to Go. He is also the founder of thechampionsclub.org, asamanthinketh.net, goalstogo.com, mydailyinsights.com, and a dozen other self-help websites. He's appeared on numerous video programs with Bob Proctor, Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, Dennis Waitley, and Mark Victor Hansen, among others. But on a personal note, Vic has made a tremendous difference in my life and my thinking over the past year. As a result of his teaching, coaching, and mentoring, I am more focused than I've ever been in my life, and I'm now accomplishing in a day what used to take me a week. My I Was Busy Now I'm Not book and the relaunch of my I Was Busy Now I'm Not coaching program are fruit of Vic's teaching. So Vic Johnson, welcome to the call, and thank you so much for agreeing to share your signature message with our audience today from around the world.
Well, thank you, Joseph. I'm excited to be a part of your work. You're doing some great things, reaching a lot of folks, and I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of that. Congratulate you on the great things you've done. You've become a tremendous champion, and I'm glad that you're sharing your message and that your particular personality and your particular goals and your particular message is reaching a lot of people. So thank you for letting me be a part of that.
You're welcome, and I appreciate that, what you had to say. Well, Vic, let's start with your story of how you climbed out of the pit of despair in the 1990s.
Well, you know, it's a much longer story than I'm going to make it today, but I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. I started out actually as a younger man. Title, You Become What You Think About. You noted that that was what Earl Nightingale identified as the strangest secret. I heard that strange secret when I was a young 20-something. I had somehow come across the book, still hadn't figured out how, but come across the book, The Magic of Thinking Big. And that book so radically changed my thinking, which eventually changed my life. And during that period of time, I began to study people who had similar messages. And of course, Earl Nightingale was basically the father of the modern day personal development industry. And I heard that message, you become what you think about, and I began to work on my thinking, and it had some pretty significant results. But the problem is when I enjoyed some success, and I enjoyed success pretty early in my 20s, I forgot where it came from. So I got away from the message. I went 20-something years without a lot of fundamental principles in my life, and I I soon reaped that harvest. It was not a pleasant harvest to reap. I was in my early 40s, and as you noted in your introduction, my life started to come apart with being evicted from our home and losing the last automobile we had. The 1997, I earned a whopping $14,000 for the entire year to support a family of 5. And it was a pretty drastic, tragic time in many ways, but in many other ways, it's the foundation of a lot of the things that I do today, because I really had to kind of go all the way back to square one and scrape off all the junk that had built up over many years of not having very sound principles and not following a very sound path. And so in many ways, the mid-1990s were tremendously influential in what I'm doing today, and contributed a great deal to my success. At that time, it would have been hard to convince me of that and hard to sell me on that, and I certainly would not want to go back and relive many of the things that I endured in the mid-90s. But if I had to, I'd do it in a heartbeat because of what it has brought. And one of the biggest things it brought was a permanent change in the way that I think, and consequently the way that I act and the actions that I take. So the message that I first heard in my early 20s, and I knew the message was sound. When I heard that message in my 20s, I resonated with it. I can't say that my motivations were real pure at that point in time, and that's probably why I didn't stick with the message. But later on, when I came back in my mid-40s, and I'm desperate, and I'm reaching out, and I'm trying to determine what it is I can do to fix my life, God led me to a tremendous gentleman named Charlie Tremendous Jones, and Charlie introduced me to the book As a Man Thinketh, which I had somehow never heard of, had never encountered. And all of that led basically to today. I wouldn't be on this program with you, and you wouldn't want me on this program if I was teaching the kind of things that I had learned and the kind of things that I had done prior to this massive change. And in that book, James Allen, very first line, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And we know that from the line in Proverbs. But Allen takes a book and he tears apart what that means and how it affects you in every area of your life. And that, along with reading a tremendous number of other books. I was desperate. I was at a point in my life where I could either just give up and live a life of really below mediocrity, or I could fix it, I could change it. And I'm glad that I had the strength, was given the strength to make the decision that I would change it. And it certainly wasn't only about As a Man Thinketh, or it wasn't only about the message you become what you think about, but without those messages, none of the other probably would have been possible. So that's hopefully a quick Cliff Notes version of where I came from and how I'm here today, and how that message has so profoundly affected me.
Well, thank you, Vic. I was reminded of some things I had forgotten about your story and really enjoyed that. I forgot that you had read The Magic of Thinking Big when you were in your 20s, and that you applied it to your life for a while and then you got off message. So that's important for our listeners. Well, Vic, in your book, You Become What You Think About, which is outstanding. I love it. I've highlighted it. I had my worker in the Philippines create just an outline of some of the most important points from things that I highlighted, because I want to be able to just keep going over those. You mentioned in the introduction that as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is one of the most profound statements we'll ever come across. You want to talk about that and just your introduction to this book?
Sure. Sure. And you know, when I first read it, I think I understood it like most people when they read that, kind of on a surface level. When I came across that book, Charlie Tremendous Jones introduced me to it. It was sitting on my library shelf for several years before I picked it up and did anything with it. But when I picked it up and I began to read it, it was so amazing. And I began to read it in an early evening time, and I was just transfixed by it. I couldn't stop. And of course, it's a very short book. I call it the most powerful 26 pages in literary history because it's not a very long book. And you know, I read it that night. It was such a phenomenal idea, and the feeling that I got from this concept of as you thinketh in your heart, which in the days when Proverbs were written, the ancient Greeks understood the heart, and the idea of the heart to them really referred to the subconscious or our unconscious part of our being, which is really where most of the things go on. It's about 10,000 times more powerful than our conscious mind. And all the things that take place whenever you're asleep, for instance, you know, there has to be something running the phenomenal body that we've been given, and that subconscious or unconscious mind is running your body. Otherwise, you couldn't function. And it does so many things so good for us, but we can also program it or allow it to be programmed, which is what happens in most of the cases, where it can do tremendous danger to us. So I started to read that book. That night I finished it. I got up the next day. It was just, I still was kind of stunned is probably a good description. I read it again the second night, and the first night, at that point, I developed a habit of marking up books with a highlighter. And the second night, I grabbed a different color, and I went through the book again and highlighted some other things that jumped off the page that I didn't see the first night, and then I repeated it. So I'd read it 3 times in the first week, and it was marked as a marked up mess because that book, every single word of it, almost is some tremendous wisdom. So I began to understand the things that had happened in my life were a result of what I'd been thinking in my heart. And now I want to make sure that the people that are listening to this don't misinterpret that, because I've had the question a lot of times, well, you know, Vic, I have these thoughts I only have occasionally, or I have this one thought. Is that going to affect me or whatever? You know, there's a debate about how many thoughts a day we have, but depending on who you listen to, who you believe, somewhere between 20,000 and 60,000 a day. And so the thoughts are going to come in. They're going to be fleeting thoughts. They're going to be, you know, you think about the appointment that you have on Thursday, or you got, you know, some crazy thing you remember from a television show you saw or whatever. These thoughts come in and out of our mind. It's not those. It's the things that we dwell on. It's the things that we continue to go back to. In some ways, you know, when Emerson said that it was what you think about all day long, it's really what you dwell on. And, you know, there are things, both negative and positive, that sometimes capture our thinking. And most often, until you learn how to control it, and you only learn to control it when you realize the power that it has, usually at that point it's negative. And so we begin to dwell on these negative things, and then one day it's manifested in our life, and we're trying to figure out where it came from. Well, it came from the idea that everything that happens is an effect. There had to be something to cause that. There's a cause and effect for everything. Brian Tracy, who's a great personal development trainer, he said the law of cause and effect is the greatest principle in the universe. And when you stop and think about it, it's very, very powerful. Isaac Newton, who was a tremendous scientist of his time, he was so far beyond most people's thinking. he had a couple of principles that are very, very important to us that we can apply every day and get applied every day in our life. But one of them, he said, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So it means whatever you do, there's going to be some kind of response, some kind of effect, some kind of reply to that. So if you go out and you create a cause, then that cause is going to result in an effect. And it's kind of similar to that Old Testament idea of you reap what you sow. You go put a seed in the ground, you don't expect it not to do something. Most of the time it's going to come up and there's going to be a harvest. But something happens when you plant that seed. There is some type of effect from that. It may die, it may wither, it may not get proper nourishment, but there's some effect from all of that. And so it is with everything that we focus on, the things that we dwell on. There will be an effect, because what happens is that every thought that we dwell on results in us having a certain feeling, okay? And that feeling can be a negative feeling, it can be a positive feeling, it can be one of happiness, it can be one of sadness. But dwelling on these thoughts creates a feeling. That feeling creates then a behavior. That behavior results in actions, and what happens with most people, those actions create more thoughts, additional thoughts. So you're dwelling on something, maybe you're dwelling on a health issue that you have, and it causes you to actually feel bad. It causes you to do some other behaviors that contribute to feeling bad, and it's a vicious circle, and it just goes round and round and round and round. And the idea that our thinking creates feelings, and our feelings create behaviors, which ultimately create actions, that's the law of cause and effect put in a circle of influence that is very, very powerful in our life. So I think I probably gave you a real long answer to a simple question, but some of those points I wanted to make sure that we understand up front, because I don't want people thinking that that worrying about these silly, I think a lot of times they are silly thoughts that we all have. It's the things that we dwell on. It's the worry that we have a lot of the times, the fear that we have, and we dwell on that. That's what results. And that's exactly what happened to me in the mid-90s. It was a result of years of some very poor thinking, which created some very poor actions on my part, and those actions created some more poor thinking. So how does that
I loved I love your answer. What jumped out at me was when you said Brian Tracy said that the law of cause and effect, he believes the most powerful law of the universe. So it's something we need to pay attention to. And then you clarified saying it's the things that we dwell on, not just that come in and out of our mind that we dwell on, that ultimately are the ones that are going to bear fruit, be it good or bad, depending on the type of thought. Well,
Yeah.
Well, Vic, will you go ahead and talk about these 5 common causes that lead to disempowering effects from chapter 1 of your book?
Sure. I think the very first thing that I found happened in my life, when you spin out of control, and that happens after, it took me many years to get to that place. It didn't happen overnight. It's kind of like a cavity, That cavity didn't happen overnight. That cavity took place over a period of time, and then one day you wake up with pain, and now that lack of action has manifested itself in a major way, but the destruction's been taking place over time. So mine didn't happen overnight. But as I continued to dwell on the wrong thinking, when when it was kind of uncontrolled most of the time, and I certainly let other people influence it a tremendous amount, then I reached a point in my life where I was living reactively, where I was responding, and so I gave you the circle a minute ago, where thoughts create feelings that create behaviors that create actions that create more thinking. The masses allow their circumstances, their current circumstances, to affect their thinking. So if you're struggling financially right now, the chances are good, if you haven't learned otherwise, that you're dwelling most of the time on that circumstance. You know, in my case, you know, I was dwelling on whether or not the tires on my car were going to make it to the end of the month, and even if it made it to the end of the month, would I have the money to, you know, to even replace them? And if you know, if I had a flat tire, I didn't have a spare tire because everything I had was on the car, and things like that. That time that I'm allowing my circumstances, all those, and it reached hours a day, where hours a day I'm caught up in focusing on and dwelling on what I didn't have, on my lack. And the more I focused on the lack, the more I got of it. And the world-class thinkers don't do it that way. They don't allow their circumstances to control their thinking. They don't react. They're proactive about it. They create the thoughts based on what they want to create in life. So I know you've become, and probably always have been, but since I've known you, really a champion goal setter, and you've done some amazing, amazing things in a short period of time. And, you know, you've put that out in front of you, and you've created plans to achieve those, but you've also, in the process, you dwell on that. You're focused on that. You're thinking about that. And you're not thinking about the things that didn't go right. You're not thinking about the things that the negative circumstances. You know, I heard a person say one time, and I wished I could remember who it was, because he should really get credit for this. He said, "There are no mistakes in life, only lessons." And most of us let our mistakes affect our thinking, that and that's where I was in the 90s. I'd made a lot of mistakes, and they haunted me. And that's and now that the effects of those mistakes are being manifested all around me and everything that's going on, you know, I'd come home and the electricity wouldn't be on because the power company had cut it off, or the phone wouldn't be on because the phone company had cut off the phone. You know, when you come home and you've already had some challenging circumstances that day, and on top of that, you face you know, something else that at that particular point in time looks to be an amazing obstacle, then you know, the tendency is, and our training is, to kind of get sucked into all of that and to get wrapped up into that. So I had to teach myself and I only did this after reading and reading and getting the wisdom of people like James Allen and people like Bob Proctor and Orson Swett Martin and so many others. That's the only thing that showed me that the way out of that was to change the way that I thought. You know, I was at a place where I had for many years allowed other people to control the way that I thought. Even though I thought I was a pretty self-confident person, even though I thought I was a pretty independent person, I realized that a lot of the times I shaped my thinking based on what other people said to me, or what I was afraid that other people would say to me. It took me that one of the greatest things that came out of that time of struggle for me was I developed the ability to forget about what other people think about me. You know, many of the things that we don't do because we're worried about what someone's going to say, or we're worried about what someone's going to think. And one day I woke up and I said, you know, most people aren't thinking about me all the time. They're thinking about them. So first of all, it probably wasn't even the truth that people were thinking about me at all, but I thought they were, and I thought they would think negatively of me, or I thought that if I acted in a certain way, that wouldn't meet their, that with their approval, and it shaped a lot of what I did, which is not a cause to create freedom in your life, to put yourself in a place where you can have some control over your destiny. And unfortunately, that's where most people live at. They live in a place where they allow someone or something to control their thinking, to control their life. One of the other things that is manifested is just a general lack of persistence, an unwillingness to overcome failure. And again, it's kind of a lot of it is from our earlier training. So many things we kind of grew into. Think and Grow Rich. It sold over 100 million copies, I believe. Napoleon Hill wrote it in 1937. He interviewed 500 of the wealthiest people of the time, and he said that the one and only common thing that they all had was persistence. So there were people that had, tremendous educations, PhDs. There were people that had no education. There were people who were attractive physically. There were people who had very unattractive physical bodies. There were so many differences among so many of them, but they all shared in common the willingness to persist. And that's something you develop through your thinking. That's something you develop. It's not something that what I love about the principle of persistence and what a strong deciding factor it is in reaching whatever goal it is you set for yourself. The reason I love it so much is because I consider it the great equalizer. Everyone's capable of it. It's not something that is beyond me intellectually. There's not a place. It doesn't require any particular intelligence level. It just requires a commitment. It requires, it also, as we've discussed in Champions Club, it requires faith. You got to have some faith, and you got to have some belief to continue to persist. If you can develop that and you can persist, you can overcome a lot of the problems that are created when your thinking's out of control. Focusing on lack, I was talking a minute ago about how I spent my day a lot of the times. I don't know why it is. One day when that day comes for me and I meet my Creator, I'm going to ask Him. I want to know what it is about the power of thinking, how it attracts things to you, and why is it that when we focus on lack, we get more of it, and when we focus on abundance, we get more of it. It is such an amazing, amazing thing. I saw it happen in my life firsthand. I experienced it. I've seen it, and I witnessed it in people that I've worked with and people that I've coached. It is an incredible thing, and I the day that realization struck me in the 90s, the day that I realized that I had created all of that mess because that's what I had focused on. Wow, it was overwhelming, and it was painful, but it was also a tremendous day of freedom for me, because I realized, wow, if you attracted all this, if you really did that, if you have that much power, then you can create the way out of it. You can attract the abundance to you, and that's what I began to do. And I began to focus on abundance. And you and I know, because almost every time you open your mouth, I hear grateful words coming out of it. So I know you know this, that's when I developed my my attitude of gratitude, I call it. That's when I began to focus on what I had and began to be thankful every day, multiple times throughout the day, I began to focus on the abundance that I had. And guess what? I got more of it. And it began to expand. And it expanded at such a rate at one point, Joseph, it was like, my gosh, it wasn't that long ago where I didn't see any opportunity in my life. I didn't see anything but lack. And now all of a sudden there's so many opportunities around me. Everything is there. And in fact, I've got a plate. I can't even finish this plate. It's piled so high. And, that's just a matter of training. It's just a matter of deciding that I'm going to focus on that. It's a matter of monitoring what you think. And when you catch yourself focusing on lack, you decide I'm going to focus on abundance. There's actually a word about thinking about what you think about, and it's called metacognition. And when I heard the description, do you ever think about what you think about, I thought it was a play on words, but it's not a play on words. Metacognition literally means to monitor what you're thinking, focus on what you're thinking about, learn how to train yourself to catch those times when you slip into a feeling of lack. That's your lower nature is automatically gonna go to that place. It's your higher nature instead that calls you to focus on abundance. And it's just a matter of training. It's a matter of doing like anything else you do. With practice, you get good. With more practice, you become great. And when your day is focused on abundance, when there is no lack in your life, in your thinking, there will be no lack in your life. You can't. It's impossible to. James Allen, great thing he said in As a Man Thinketh, which was so very, very encouraging and so very, very powerful to me. He said it's impossible to move within and stand still without. So it's impossible to create this attitude of abundance, this feeling of abundance, these thoughts of abundance. It's impossible to create that on the inside and not see something manifested on the outside as a result of it. Why? Because it goes back to that first principle that we started with, the law of cause and effect. Those thoughts, maintaining, dwelling on those ideas of abundance, that's the cause, and the effect is going to be manifested in the physical plane, the physical realm at some point in time. And when I understood what Alan meant when he said it's impossible, you can't move within and stand still without, I knew then that my time of trial was coming to an end. I knew that it was just around the corner because I already knew how far I'd moved inside. I already felt it. I just couldn't see it on the outside. It wasn't ready yet. It wasn't time yet. And that was an amazing victory, a tremendous time for me. The other thing that we get hung up on is not seeing the opportunity in the things where we see only failure. I just earlier shared with you that the time that I went through this tremendous trial probably in the end will be the greatest time of my life because it opened for me some doors of thinking, some doors of action, so many doors that led to so many great things in my life. I mean, I could easily say that the last 10 years of my life have been by far the very best years I've ever lived on this planet. Whether I look at my family life, whether I look at my financial life, physical life, spiritual life, whatever part of my life you want to look at, it has been the very, very, very best in the last 10 years. And all of it came out of what appeared at the time to be something tremendously tragic. So Bob Proctor explained something one time about circumstances, and I've never forgotten it. Circumstances are neutral. So whatever's going on in your life today, if it's something negative to you, it is only neutral. It is not, it's neither positive nor negative. You're seeing it from a negative perspective from where you stand. And I'll never forget, he used the example, I thought it was a beautiful example, that, you know, you're on the way to work, you're late for work, and you're driving down the road, and you have a flat tire. And, you know, you pull over on the side of the road, you've got no, you know, you don't have a jack, or you don't have a tire or whatever. You're sitting there again late for work, and, you know, right then you're struck with how negative that circumstance is. That's certainly what it appears to be. But what about the emergency vehicle that pulls up behind you to help you change the tire, to help you get back on the road? Is it a positive or a negative circumstance for that individual or for that company? Well, of course, it's a positive circumstance. That's how they earn their living. Well, the circumstance is the circumstance, and it's neither positive nor negative. It's the perspective that you hold of it. And you being on the side of the road with a flat tire have a one perspective of it. The person driving that emergency tow truck, who's going to earn some income from it, has got a different perspective of it. And it's this very same circumstance. So if you ever find yourself in a circumstance and you want to look at the other perspectives of it, draw an imaginary circle, kind of like if you had a campfire in the middle. Put that circumstance in the middle, if it were like a campfire, and then walk around that campfire and look at it from the different perspectives. Look at that circumstance that you're in. Try to find the different perspectives of that very same circumstance. And from the place that you're standing originally, it may look very, very, very negative. But as you begin to walk around that circle, as you begin to walk around the circumstance, you'll begin to see all of the different aspects of it, and you will find opportunities. You will find that it's not entirely the way that you perceive it today. Great things came to me out of some very, very dire circumstances, some very negative circumstances, because I couldn't see on the other side. I was too caught up in lack, and I was too caught up in dwelling on the thoughts that I had of negative things. I couldn't see that on the other side of that circle there was a new me coming out of this, that I was stripping down from all the years of junk that I'd piled on there, and here was going to become a new person, and that new person was going to go on to live a life that I had only dreamed about, and even beyond that. I've done some things that have eclipsed even the dreams that I held for many years. So had I seen it from that perspective at the time, I can assure you that it would have changed my attitude toward it. And that's exactly what happened, even though I didn't know what was happening. I didn't hear Bob explain that idea of circumstances for some years, but that's exactly what happened. Is the longer I was on that journey, and the more I began to grow, the more I began to realize that, wow, this is one huge opportunity, because I figured I'd already gone as low as I could go. I'd already figured I'd hit the bottom. So anything that I did, if I did it right, was going to be positive, and I was building something, a foundation, for the future. So those things, if as we go, we can think of those 5 things and kind of grade ourselves and kind of compare how we're doing in those 5 areas, it can have a tremendous, tremendous impact on our thinking.
Well, thank you, Vic. I enjoy hearing you speak each week, and I'm really learning a lot of new things. Even though I read your book entirely and highlighted, I'm learning new things, and I'm taking notes on the side as well. Will you go ahead and talk about Chapter 2, the importance of planting new seeds, from your book?
Sure. I think the idea is we don't live in a vacuum. So, it's not just I'm going to get rid of the negative thinking. I'm going to change that. You got to have something to substitute for it. You have to have something to put in its place. And so you have to you create a plan for that. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but you create a plan to do that, and it all starts with the input. So whatever you're inputting into your thinking, those are the new seeds. That's going to bring your new harvest. So what you're looking at today, that's the harvest from the seeds that you planted before. When I looked at what I had in the 90s, in the mid 90s, that was a result of the harvest, and it was certainly not a harvest that I was proud of. It was certainly not one that I was happy with. When I started again, and I started to plant new seeds, now it was different, because I began to understand that I'd given control of my thinking over to so many external sources. At one point in time, the cable TV was cut off, which one of the biggest blessings ever to occur in my life, because I didn't have the money to get it turned back on, and when I did eventually get the money, I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave it off, because I really don't need that negative influence. I don't need most of the stuff that you see, unless you're real judicious about what you watch, especially, I mean, if you kind of pretty much watch any of the news, if you watch very much of it, it's hard not to have a lot of negative seed sowed. And I figured, quite frankly, I canceled my newspaper subscription, even though the newspaper publisher was a good friend of mine. I canceled my newspaper subscription because I figured out that I didn't need to be planting those kind of seeds every day. I figured if it got bad enough, someone would tell me about it. I didn't have to keep up with it every day. And you know, when the cable got cut off, I just allowed it to stay off. I don't know. I have no way to measure it because I didn't have a control group, but I bet my children benefited tremendously by going 5 years without cable TV. I just bet they did. And I'm not an advocate of you know, turning off everything in your life. We have cable TV in our house now, but we just don't watch a lot of it. Interesting thing, Joseph, we had a birthday party for my youngest son, and a couple of his friends were university football players, and they came over to the house and were part of the party, and we were sitting outside my office on a little porch I have outside that looks out over the lake, and we're sitting right there in front of the office, and one of them turned to me and said, "Mr. J," he said, "how did you get all of this?" And he was referring to the house and this beautiful place that we have here. He said, "How did you get all of this?" And I said, "Come here, I'll show you." And I turned around and I opened the door to my office / library, and I said, "I got it right in here." I said, "All of these books." I said, "Did you know that it's been said, Jim Rohn said, that poor people have big TVs, rich people have big libraries?" And he thought about that for a minute, and the irony of it really struck him. But then he said to me, he said, "But Mr. J, you've got 7 TVs. And I said, "You're right, Mo, but the library bought those TVs. The TV didn't buy the library." And I said, "I spend a whole lot more time in the library than I do in front of the TVs." So, you know, it's amazing what we put our value on. And, you know, yesterday in our Champions Club call yesterday, you remember one of the points that I made was, you know, if your habit now is watching more than 60 minutes a day of television, that you might want to consider adopting a new habit, at least for 30 days, to see what happens and to see what kind of change it happens. And, you know, I did that. That was my plan with the newspaper. I was going to see what happens after 30 days without a subscription. It was so amazing that I continued it on. And, of course, the cable thing was forced upon me, but when I look back and think all those seeds that didn't get planted, instead I was spending that time planting seeds. I was reading like a maniac. I was reading 2 to 3 books a week, and they were all classic books. They were all personal development books, and you know, that was what I had to focus on. I had to filter all the stuff that was coming in from the outside. I had to be the guardian of my heart. If I would see the heart as the same way as the Greeks would see it, as your subconscious or unconscious, I had to be the guardian of that, because if I didn't, then there was going to be a lot of seeds planted that I didn't want planted, because I'd already seen the results of those kinds of harvests. And I'll give you a good example of how it works. If you've ever laid down on the sofa and or in your bed and had the television on and watch a late night show, or especially if it's a scary show or a scary movie, and you fall asleep with the television on, or you go to sleep just after you've turned the television off, and then that night experience some dreams that incorporate some of what you saw or some of what took place in that TV that you were watching. Well, that's your subconscious, your unconscious at work on that information that you gave it before. You did not filter that out. And so I don't ever, if I'm going to watch any television late at night, I will never watch anything that is discomforting. I will never watch anything that I will end up focusing on. I learned that if I'd read 15 or 20 minutes from a great book just before I went to sleep, when I'm in what they call that alpha state, that my unconscious and subconscious was so impressionable at that point that my mind would literally go to work at night and work on that information. I thought that was such a powerful thing for me to do, and so I developed a habit of doing that. And that was why I was able to read so many books every week, because I was reading constantly and certainly every evening. So you have to take charge of that. No one else is. Believe me, the world's going to be dumping stuff on you all the time. I'm amazed at the things that people try to dump in our minds, and sometimes it's certainly not always done with intent. It's not always done to harm you. It's just that's the way in the world that we live in. And people don't realize, most people don't realize that their life is being influenced, their thinking is being influenced by someone else's thinking. Just think of the power of advertising and what it does in our lives, and how much how many actions we take as a result of big advertising campaigns and the impact and the influence that it has on us. That's allowing, the external thoughts to overpower yours, or you're not filtering them. And again, I don't want to alarm anyone. I don't want to, we were given a life that is unbelievably immense, and it is just unlimited abundance in it. So it's something to be excited about and happy for, and not something to be upset about or worried about or whatever. But there are things that we need to guard against. We have to have a guard at the door, and before we allow someone to deposit their stuff inside the door, we need to check it. We need to make sure that that's something that we want those kinds of seeds to grow. And that's, it doesn't matter how old you are. Certainly most all of us are judicious about that with our children, with our grandchildren. Well, guess what? You need to take that same idea, toward yourself. You need to be just as judicious toward yourself, because it's going to have the same kind of results that you're worried about your children or grandchildren getting from. It's going to have that same kind of result on you. So, how are we on time, Joseph?
Well, we have technically about 11 minutes to go on the clock. I'm willing, this is so good, I'm willing to extend it a little bit. I don't know what our audience can do. Almost everyone that's been on the call, we have a lot of people, has stayed on for the entire time. So I think they really appreciate what you're having to share. So I'll leave. What would you like to do here, Vic?
Well, I think, I think we reach a point where, and I would be happy to come back if there's, because we're not going to make it anywhere close to being through the book, and I'm glad that we focused on this early part so much. So, if we go another 10 or 15 minutes, I'm happy to come back if people still have questions or whatever, and finish up the ideas. I want to send a couple of things home, though, because there's some things that you can, there's some things that you can do, and you can begin to do them now. And one of those things is, first of all, you can make the decision that you're going to become the guardian of the door, that you're going to station yourself at that door to your heart, and that you're going to evaluate everything that's going in. And so what you might stop and do is stop and look at, what does your day consist of now? I got to the point where I had surrounded myself with so much good stuff going in that it was very, very hard for me to ever get into a place where I was, feeling lack, because there was just so much stuff going in. I love music, but I quit listening to the shock jock in the morning, that was funny and, stuff like that, but kind of mindless stuff. So instead I stuck in a CD by Bob Proctor or Brian Tracy or Earl Nightingale or somebody else, and so that would be my ride to work. And any time that I had available, I was in control, total control of the information that I was putting in. And then when I saw things, when people would begin to say things to me, I could turn, if someone would say something to me that I knew was against the principles I was trying to develop, I was pleasant, I would smile, but I refused to accept it. I would not accept that information. If someone were to tell me, that's impossible, or, it's going to be difficult to do that without this or without that, I just turned it off. I refused to accept that. I refused to accept the programming of someone else, because I had decided now that I was in charge of it, and I decided that I was going to take those steps. So one thing that I would encourage everyone on the call to do is immediately evaluate all of the information that's going in. That's going to be the information that's going to influence a lot of your thinking. So first of all, if you don't have any control at all, or you're not aware of it, or and you don't make yourself aware of it, then it's kind of like the weed blowing in the wind. It's just going to blow in whatever direction the wind blows it, and the poor weed has no control over which direction it goes. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way before, but that's exactly the way that I felt. And when I got to the place where all these things that I had earlier done, all the causes that I had created in my life, when all those effects began to manifest, I felt exactly like that weed. And I would blow one way, and then I'd blow another way, and then I'd blow another way, and there was no control at all on my part. Something else too, Joseph, I know we talked about it a lot in the Champions Club, is the power of affirmations. And a lot of the thinking that we have, and this is why I don't think we can cover a lot of the things that I'd like to cover in more depth today. But I know that you've heard us talk a lot about the power of belief and about changing that, and that's all related to the way that we think. Our beliefs are all fundamentally based on what we think, and of course that thinking based on by what goes in. And then once that belief has been established, we're affirming that belief. We're affirming it by our actions. We're affirming it by the things that we say to others. We're affirming it by the things that we say to ourselves. We're affirming it by allowing others to affirm that information and us accepting that. So one thing that I also did was I created some what I call truth cards. And I'd looked at the areas of my life that I had problems in, which which was just about every area of my life, and I looked at those areas and I examined the beliefs that I held about them, and I created a set of positive affirmations to change the negative thinking. For instance, one of the beliefs that I held was that I never had enough time. I always felt like I was being rushed. I always felt like I was, and I'd get to places late. I'd get to appointments late. I wasn't turning things in on time. It just seemed like I never had enough time. And I had developed some habits that had reinforced that, and my constant behaviors continued to reinforce that, and there was nothing there to ever change it. I never had any kind of program or any kind of decision to change it. And as I began to examine that, and I looked at the truth of that, is that idea true? Is the idea that I don't have enough time, is that belief that I hold, is it true or is it false? And as I looked at it and dug deeper, I realized there's no way it could be true, because no one else had any more time than I did. Bill Gates didn't have any more time than I did. Steve Jobs didn't have any more time than I did. And they were doing incredible things with their 24 hours. So how were they able to do that, given they were doing it in the same time? So I came to the conclusion that that belief was a false belief, that it was not true, that I had all the time that I needed. And as I began to look at it, I realized that the truth of that statement is that I always have enough time to do everything I need to do. I don't have enough time to do everything I want to do. You'll never have enough time to do everything you want to do if you want to do very many things. I want to do a lot of things. I'll never have enough time to do all those. I'm happy and I'm blessed now to have so much abundance, but I'll never be able to do all those things. But I'll always have enough time to do everything I need to do. And as I began to develop that as a belief, I began to affirm that. And so I wrote that statement out on a card. And I had 52 of those cards with different beliefs that I would affirm. And I would read those to myself repeatedly over and over and over. And I would look for opportunities to prove it. Because part of it is not just reading it. Part of it is not just reciting some creed or some statement or some affirmation. What really drives it home is acting on it. So I began to monitor my thinking, and any time I'd find myself in that stressful place where I felt like I didn't have enough time, I would stop. Just as that thought began to work its way into my mind, I would say, wait a minute, that's not true. You've got enough time to do everything you need to do. And to this day, I can control my stress. I can control the negative way I feel about any kind of time pressure, whether it's going to the airport and, traffic being blocked, and looking at my watch and realizing that, I'm going to be late. I can shut all that down now. I can say, I'm going to have enough time. I'm going to make it. It's going to be all right. And even the times when I may not make the flight, that attitude creates opportunities. I've had airlines do things for me that made it even better. So, I controlled that. But if I allowed my old thinking, my old patterns to be in charge, then it would have led to one more behavior, negative, creating more negative thinking, and I've been back in that spiral again. So something else that you can do is to change some minimal habits, in my opinion. I talked a minute ago about reading 15 minutes a day. And I would encourage everyone to, if you don't have that as a habit, to just try it. Just try it. Just for funs. Try it. And I've never met anyone who tried that and stuck with it for a week or so that wasn't really excited about doing that on an ongoing basis, even if they're not big readers. And I've seen people who, I had a carpenter one time that I was working with, and he told me that he hadn't read a book in 10 years, and he said prior to that I probably hadn't read 2 books in my entire life. And after 30 days of that habit, he was a changed person. It was amazing. And he was so excited with the direction of his life. He was so excited about how one little change could make such a big difference. But that change came about because his thinking now is not in the old way that he had, but in the new way from what he was reading. You can create a habit to do that every single day. Just like I use the example, you have a habit, hopefully you have a habit of brushing your teeth every day. If you didn't, eventually you wouldn't have any teeth to worry about. So make it a habit like that. You have a nighttime ritual or a nighttime routine, just add it to that nighttime routine. Or if you're a morning person, add it to your morning ritual. The carpenter, what he did was an interesting thing, and I've shared this technique. Was he took his lunch to work every day. He worked outside, obviously, and he took his lunch to work every day. And he would buy 2 copies of the book. He'd buy. You can buy paperbacks today on Amazon as a used book. You can buy used books so cheaply today, and that's what he would do. He'd buy 2 copies of the book. One of them was a permanent copy for him to have. The other one he would tear up. He would tear a chapter out every day, and he would pack it in his lunch, and he would go to work, and he would read that chapter while he was eating his lunch. Now, I don't know he never told me what he did with his lunch hour prior to that, but can you imagine getting any more value out of that time, that lunch hour time, than reading 15, 20, 30 minutes from an incredible piece of wisdom? These habits are not, and what I love about the process is these habits are not big, major habits. They do take commitment. They do take a desire to create change in your life, but they're not things that in my opinion are difficult to do. It's not like you're going out and you're running 15 miles every day or 20 miles every day getting ready to run a marathon. They're much, much simpler than that. The idea of taking 20 or 30 minutes every day to listen to something or watch something that has some positive value to it, that's not something that's difficult to do. You simply take some of that time that you're doing something else that's not making that positive contribution, and you just substitute it. It's not a difficult change. It's not something, as a matter of fact, you won't even kind of hardly even notice it until it begins to work on your thinking, and then one day you wake up and you go, wow, it's working. And that was what was exciting to me, was opening that little book, As a Man Thinketh, and reading that information was, well, again, it was like I was stunned the next day. But what was even more incredible was after application of that for 30 days, how phenomenally different I felt, how much progress I'd made in just such a short period of time, and how I began to see the world and the people around me differently than I had before. So I send you off with that today, and I encourage you to adopt some habits that will help you change the way that you think, because you ultimately are going to become what you think about. You're ultimately, in fact, you are today what you have thought about up to this point in time. The things that you've dwelled on. Look at the things in your life, and if you'll go back, you'll be, if you do some serious, and see, I was at a place of desperation. So I did a lot of serious examination, not because I necessarily wanted to. It was very painful, but that I was just desperate enough to do it. And I saw where my patterns of thinking, I saw that things that I had dwelled on, how they had come to manifest in my life, how I had actually created that in my life, because whatever it is you dwell on, whatever it is you think about all day long, that's the world you're going to create. That's the world that you're going to live in. And it was, again, painful for me to admit that I'd created that mess that I had. Very, very liberating to come to the conclusion that if I'd created that, then I could create the way out. And that's what I'm hoping for you if you find yourself in those circumstances today. Joseph, I'm excited to have been with you, and like I said, I know we didn't get it all covered, but I think I left them with some things to work on.
Oh, absolutely, Vic. I put on the screen there just some simple calls to action that you can do to see more results in your life. I'm a leadership coach, a dream coach, and in coaching there's a saying that coaching isn't coaching unless the client takes action. And I consider most of the webinars I do as group coaching calls, even though this isn't interactive with you, or we're not taking questions and answers right now. But a simple thing you can do is to share this message. If it's impacted you today, if this has helped you today, you can refer your friends to the webinar replay. You'll receive an email within the next day letting you know where the replay link is. You can refer people. When you share the blessings that you've received, then that allows new blessings to come into your life. Second thing you can do is you can read the book, which I highly recommend. You Become What You Think About. When I was released on Kindle in the first weekend, there were more than 18,000 downloads. The third thing you can do is subscribe to the Champions Club at thechampionsclub.org. You can enter your email to receive a free video. A fourth thing that you could do is enroll in the Champions Club. I enrolled in that a year and a half ago. That's been the best business investment I've made in the past several years. And I invest in a variety of things. And Vic leads those calls. There's a webinar that takes place every Monday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I make it a high priority to just be on those calls just because of what I learned, how it's reinforcing the thinking. And I've learned just a lot of things about hosting webinars, just being a part of those calls from how Vic does them. And then, Vic has a variety of books. You can find out more resources at asamanthinketh.net. But I encourage you to write down here in the next few minutes just one action step that you'll take. It could be making a change in a habit like Vic talked about. And I want to thank you, Vic, for being our guest speaker today, for speaking to my audience and Lynn Lee's audience. I want to thank each of you who chose to invest your most valuable resource, your time, to be a part of this. And I just bless you and pray that you will choose to change your thinking, to change your life, to live a bigger life, to live a better life, to leave a better mark on the world before it's time for you to go. So blessings to each and every one of you. And once again, Vic, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate it.
So this concludes our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.